I feel like in RPGs, specifically for the game master, they are seen as the one who sets the rules for the game. They are the end all be all in terms of the table. They will provide the snacks, they have a vast knowledge of the game, they understand the lore, and is generally assumed to know everything about the RPG and or be the leader of the group. But I disagree with that idea. In this video, I'll be discussing why I think the GM is simply a player who's just as deserving of a fun and safe experience, just like their fellow, players. And by removing the GM from this pillar of exceptionalism, we can have more fuller and enjoyable TTRPG experiences by recognizing that everyone deserves a fun and safe experience. The GM can be any number of roles in a game, and that does mean at times the GM can even take a back row perspective. I think it depends somewhat on the system's end goal and tone. We're going to take a couple of looks at different RPGs and see what they have to say about the DM, GM, or facilitator experience. Starting off first, Dungeon Crawl Classics. DCC makes it clear that the GM is the end all and be all for rules and adjudications. As stated, the judge is always right. Let the rules bend to you, not the other way around. Always roll your dice in public. Let the dice fall where they may, as the saying goes. The players will learn fear as they trust the objectivity of your combat encounters. And while this is pretty overdramatic, it makes a point that the GM's word is law and not up for debate. It leads into a GM being the de facto leader, which this game works with since this is trying to base itself off of older editions of Dungeons & Dragons. However, other games take a different approach. In Call of Cthulhu, the GM, aka known as the Keeper of Arcane Lore, has one simple job: to prepare scenarios and run games without bias. In Call of Cthulhu, the Keeper has the responsibility of preparing scenarios and running the game without bias. It is the Keeper's duty to make the investigators, opposition, smart, and mean. This also means, unlike DCC, Call of Cthulhu's tone is far more dark and dreary. Thus, the Keeper's job should also be to add to that tone. You want to create atmosphere, situations, and encounters that add to the horror of Call of Cthulhu, which is something that is going to be different depending on the game. Thus, a GM needs to prepare scenarios that account for that. In other games, such as Powered by the Apocalypse games, the GM takes a less active approach. Let's take Monster Hearts 2nd Edition. You take on the role of the MC, and the MC has a shared responsibility amongst all the players. And unlike the other games we've covered, this is one of the first games that states clearly that the GM and the players have a shared role together. You share the same 4-point agenda as everyone else at the table. You must make each main character's lives not boring. You need to keep the story feral. You need to say what the rules demand, and you need to say what honesty demands. However, the MC is a facilitator and teacher who does not make any roles. Rather, they make reactions that can help elevate the story and narrative, and will likely complicate the awkward lives that these teenage monsters live in. Thus, you have to embrace melodrama, and have to hear the messy lives of being a teenager. And there are some games that entirely throw out all that. Forget about tone, forget about being the rules lawyer, forget about melodrama. Some games just want to cause havoc and be sarcastic, like Paranoia Perfect Edition. In this game, it throws away all the conventions and tells you to be stingy, be objective, be weird, and allow your players to backstab. You can change the rules or run on the fly. Whatever you want, the choice is yours. This game's style tone for GMing is laissez-faire because Paranoia Perfect Edition is a game about satire and the bizarre, strange world that your clone characters have to survive as they please the lovely and great perfect computer. And finally, there are some games that are GM-less. Every player at the table has equal and shared responsibility to facilitating a fun experience in GM-less games. This is especially seen in games such as Ironsworn or Torment Arc. Thus, all of these games imply or say semi-different things on being a game master, and that's because, like being a player, a GM is not a stagnant position. They can be whatever the group agrees at the table to be. They can, and I think, should shift as well with the tone, style, and themes of the game. One GM might need to set tension for their games, while another doesn't care about writing down notes or building worlds. So, all GM playstyles and practices, in my opinion, are perfectly viable as long as everyone is having fun. But despite all of those examples, and despite my argument, I'm sure people will continue to argue that the GM is not a player. And to their credit, they have a point. The GM in games will function differently than players. They will likely have to put in a little bit more work to run the game. And this distinction does matter since games need a facilitator, or well, some games need a facilitator. Plus, it helps for organizing games. Let's be 100%, Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition is one of the most popular tabletop role-playing games, and we just can't throw out the term GM since that game requires there to be a GM. However, it is assumed that GM take responsibility of all administrative tasks. These tasks, like so many others, can be split amongst everyone at the table. So context matters greatly to when you're GMing and how you're GMing. So yes, the GM is a player, and while they might not function the same way as a player, they still deserve all the respect and fun that the players are going to gain from the game, even if the enjoyment the GM or GMs gain isn't from playing, but rather running the game. And talking about things the GM deals with, there's also this sense of hierarchy for the GM. This popularization of the GM as this font of knowledge is likely in part from actual plays. I also think this comes from the fact that GMing is seen as a hierarchical top-down model of gaming. And that is a fair assessment, since from the implication of DCC, it pulls from this idea that the GM's word is law. But the GM doesn't need to be in a position of hierarchy or power. In fact, why does the GM need to be seen as someone having power? What is there to be gained from creating the GM as someone hierarchically different than the players? And here are my reasons that I conjured up. 1. It could be that by creating this hierarchy, it will decrease the chances of players lying or trying to power game. 2. It could help with players stopping themselves from breaking the rules. And 3. It could be tied to the hobby's past as a wargaming hobby that had a top-down leadership style. So I understand why this hierarchy might exist and continues to exist in games. However, GM-less and solo journaling games I think exist especially as a testament to challenging the need for a GM and puts the responsibility on all players or the player to create a wonderful story and experience together. Thus, GMs can, and I would think, should be on equal footing with their players. They don't need to assume the paragon of truth at the table and instead share the responsibility of playing a fun and engaging game together. But while I do not care for hierarchical GMs who rule over their tables, for some players, they might be entirely okay with that. Whatever choice you make, players, consider whether you want a more my way highway GM, quote unquote. And game masters, consider why you chose to lead in a hierarchical style to begin with. Tabletop role-playing games are community-based even if they are solo role-playing games. These games cannot function with the creative, financial, emotional, and physical labor of groups of people coming together to create the games of their choice. Thus, at our tables, we owe it to others and everyone at the table to take care of each other and to show up for each other. But I know some would argue, I don't owe shit to anyone. And I'm going to push back on that rugged individualism. Tabletop role-playing games work and exist because They are a group activity that allow us and others to imagine ourselves in so many awesome, scary, and interesting ways. Role-playing games can be ways for us to explore our identities, thoughts, or relax while facing the brunt and horrors of the real world and what's beyond. We all crave community and want to be accepted and nurtured by others. That means for GMs and players, while our fun might come from different things, we owe it to others to work to fostering community together. Now, is it easy? No. Are you going to make mistakes sometimes? Yes. Are you going to overstep boundaries? Yes. But regardless of your mistakes, regardless of your failings, whether you are a game master, player, you watch the games, or you're creative, we owe it to others and those in our circles to create a gaming space where everyone, and especially those on the margin, are having fun and feel safe. That means sometimes you gotta gatekeep and not allow certain groups of people, such as alt-right dweebs and fascists, into your games. That means setting boundaries for you at your table. And that means acknowledging when you as a GM or even as the player aren't having fun. After all, an enriching party is just that, a party, and no party can happen when you're writing solo. Thus, I see it as important that groups work together to foster fun environments together. The GM is a player with different rules and parameters, and every approach, they should be included in the fun. But GM style is also super important, and I have an amazing video discussing GM styles of play over here. Next, special shout out to my Patreon supporters Harrison Parker and Jakibi for your continued support. If you too want to support me, you can check out my Patreon over here, as well as my Ko-fi over here. Finally, if you like this content, feel free to like and subscribe. It greatly helps me, and hey, it's entirely free. And as always, I'm your average, everyday queer host, Blurry Disposition. Be all, have an awesome day. Ciao.